Hello, good evening. As of today, The Purveyors of Destiny is a text jettisoned upon the amoebic genre of Indian non-fiction. It is neither history nor memory. It is neither biography in its conventional sense, nor is it documentation. The prologue opens with an anecdotal story about actor-writer Hesketh Pearson expressing his intention to pen Oscar Wilde's biography, but being met with reproach by George Bernard Shaw, whom he revered and also wrote about the year prior. Similarly, for Chatterjee, the project of writing a cultural biography, as it is aptly called, of the Indian Railways, is like writing about a taking human presence, he admits in the prologue. It dawns on a persona with a history, with life, with character, a breathing corporeal presence that sprawls over the Indian subcontinent, carrying in its ancient long arms the seamlessly transitioning narratives of the colonial to post-colonial experience, serving as a locus of narrative shifts, too subtle to notice except when we consider all of it at once. The book proudly promises to fail the academic's expectations, as well as the lover of easy-breezy Indian non-fiction, both of them akin to the English and French who found Oscar Wilde's French either too English or the French who found it too Wilde's French either too English or too French. With discussions including Kipling to Twain, Satyajit Ray to contemporary Indian cinema, the text undertakes not just an observation of constant movement, but shifts back and forth, much like memory and myth. This time, it's the railways subtly carving space in the national psyche. With this, I would like to welcome to the stage Dr. Raj C. Kumar, founding Vice Chancellor at O.P. Jindal University, and Dr. Arup Chatterjee to take the mic.
A very good evening to all of you. First of all, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you to this book launch and panel discussion. The launch of the book, The Purveyors of Destiny, a cultural biography of the Indian Railways. I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate my colleague for really bringing out a unique book. In fact, there have been many books written about the Indian Railways, but I would like to say that this is an extraordinary tour de force on some sort of a cultural journey of the Indian Railways. In that sense, it's unique, and I would like to congratulate my colleague. We will come back to it a little later. I also want to take this moment to recognize the presence of very many distinguished individuals who have taken time to come and be part of this book launch, as well as panel discussion, which will be followed by the book launch. I want to particularly thank the Honorable Minister, Mr. Suresh Prabhu, who not only accepted to be here, but also who encouraged the author and also kindly has given us a message. Unfortunately, he had to be in Mumbai today. He mentioned when he accepted the invitation that there would be certain circumstances which will be beyond his control, which will take him out of Delhi, and that's unfortunately had happened, and hence he is not with us, but I know for sure that he appreciated and indeed encouraged this effort by our colleague. I also want to take a moment to thank Mr. Shakti Sinha, Director of the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, himself a very distinguished civil servant who has had a very distinguished career in India as well as abroad, and right now who, despite his extraordinarily busy schedule in building an institution of eminence, he had taken time to be part of this launch, so I'm grateful to him. Before I invite Arup, I want to just briefly introduce the university to all of you. I know that there are many of you who are from outside the university and may not be familiar with the university, so I'll take a few minutes. O.P. Jindal Global University was established as a philanthropic initiative of our founding chancellor, Mr. Naveen Jindal. I had the privilege to meet him during the years 2006 and 7 and persuaded him to do three things. One, to contribute substantial resources. Second, to commit to do it in a not-for-profit manner. And third, to let me have the academic freedom, autonomy, and independence to build a world-class university in India. By late 2007, Mr. Jindal agreed to all of that, and I moved from Hong Kong in early 2008 to India to set up the university from scratch. The journey was quite extraordinary. We brought in many individuals to be part of this journey, And that culminated in the government of Haryana passing a legislation establishing the first private university in the state of Haryana in Sonipat on 27th January 2009. Soon after, as late as 30th September 2009, we began the first academic session of the first school of the university, Jindal Global Law School, of which Arup is a faculty member. We never looked back. In 2010, we started the Jindal Global Business School. In 2011, the Jindal School of International Affairs. In 2012, the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy. In 2013, the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities. And in 2016, the Jindal School of Journalism and Communication. We are nearly 8 years old, and as we have covered this journey in the last 8 years, right now we have nearly 3,000 students. It's a fully residential university in a nearly 100-acre campus located in Sonipat. We have over 225 full-time faculty members across these different schools. There are 5 things that have helped us define our vision and continue to shape our mission. First, we are a global university. For us to be a global university means to have a global curriculum, a global course structure, a global program, a global faculty, a global research agenda, all of which promoting global interaction. Second, it also means for us to be able to build substantive international collaborations with universities around the world. We have built these partnerships with over 175 institutions spread across 45 different countries in the world, in which we have implemented 10 different forms of collaborations. These include faculty exchanges, student exchanges, joint teaching, joint research, joint conferences, joint publications, dual degree programs, summer schools and winter schools, and study abroad programs, as well as joint executive education programs. The second part of our vision is also to be able to build a university with engagements around the world, which not only draws upon the research agenda, but also to be able to bring in faculty from around the world. Over 20% of our faculty members are non-Indian nationals recruited from 20 different countries in the world, and the rest of the Indians, including me and my colleagues, are individuals who have studied in India, studied overseas, worked overseas, and have returned to India. That has been part of our institutional vision. Another aspect of what we do is our strong commitment to research. In fact, today's work that we are celebrating, Arup's work itself, is an example of why we need to promote research and knowledge creation, in which academia engages on some of the critical issues and engages and participates in intellectually engaging conversations. And that is the work of Arup that we are celebrating. It has been lamented time and again in the Indian context that not a single Indian university is one of the top 200 in the world, notwithstanding the fact that over 2,000 years ago, India played a leadership role in building great institutions such as Nalanda, Takshila, Vallabhi, and Vikramshila, and many other institutions. The contemporary evolution of Indian universities over the last several decades have had a number of challenges, and Jindal Global University was established to advance some of those agendas relating to institution building and its own relationship to nation building. The third aspect of what we do is our strong commitment to public service and knowledge manifestations, and that's reflected in the work that our faculty does, and also the work that our students are engaged in relation to public service, particularly in relation to many programs that they do both in the nearby districts in Sonipat as well as in Mewat district, but also other parts of India. Public service is also embedded in our commitment to providing access to high quality education for students who may not be able to afford their education. Over 70% of our students are studying with some form of scholarship or the other, and we strongly believe that access to high quality education is a critical aspect of institution building. The fourth aspect of what we do is our strong commitment to creating an intellectually vibrant environment through conferences, lectures, workshops, and book launches. Believe it or not, in the last 8 years, this book is the 16th book that a faculty member of Jindal Global University is publishing. And this is independent of over 1,500 publications our faculty members have produced, which does not include the newspaper articles and other articles published in popular writings. But we are talking about academic writings, and over 50% of which are in international arena, and over 50% of which are journal articles. That also means that JGU has acquired a very significant citation index in the last 8 years. Lastly, I will say that another aspect of what the university is deeply committed to is to be able to provide training and capacity building programs for mostly civil servants, but also many other individuals and organizations. I want to end by saying that one of the important things that our university is deeply committed to is to promote interdisciplinarity in all what we do. In fact, Mr. Shakti Sinha, just before we entered this hall, was keen to ask that how come Arup is in the law school. And I mentioned to him that our law school is very interdisciplinary. We have a large number of historians, sociologists, political scientists, anthropologists, economists, of course, people who work in the field of literature in all its manifestations. There is a very strong commitment to promoting interdisciplinarity, not only within the school, but also between the schools. So our students across different schools are in a position to cross-register and cross-list courses, even though they belong to a particular school. In fact, my own experience in being a student of Delhi University was right the opposite. I was a student of the Faculty of Law, Campus Law at Delhi University, and within 5 minutes distance is located the Delhi School of Economics, which is a premier institution. And within another 5 minutes distance is located the Faculty of Management Sciences, which is the premier business school in Delhi University. But I have to say that never before in the history of Delhi University ever a faculty member could walk into the next school, or a student could walk into the next school and actually take a course. It is simply inflexible. It was inflexible when I was a student, and it continues to remain inflexible even today. So in some ways, the idea of promoting interdisciplinarity is deeply embedded in what we do. Another aspect of what we do, which is critical for the book and for Arup's work, is also in relation to recognition of the importance of humanities and social sciences. There is a significant problem that we are facing both in India but also around the world, that there has been a steady decline in funding as well as institution building efforts relating to humanities in all its manifestations. Increasingly, many departments and faculties that focuses its work in relation to humanities are being shut down or are inevitably being closed, not just in India but also around the world. During that time, it is gratifying to see the importance that is being given, at least in the context of the work that Arup is doing, to be able to have an opportunity for such work to be able to come to the public domain, particularly in an institutional context. So I once again want to congratulate Arup for his important work. I hope that this work will inspire many students, faculty, not only in our university but also beyond, as well as others, to be able to think about the big institutions of our country and their historical contributions that goes beyond their impact that is typically assessed in the more economic and developmental context. This work is an example of how institutions, and I consider the Indian Railways as one of the most significant and critical institutions of India, how it has contributed towards shaping the life of India, and that is the journey that Arup has taken us in this work. So once again, congratulations Arup for your work, and I hope that you will continue to publish many more such works, and we will have an opportunity to do many more launches. One of the most difficult thing to do a launch is to have an audience. Since you have achieved that, we can continue to do many more launches for the many books that you intend to write. When Arup came and told me about the fact that his book is ready, my immediate thing was we should do a launch. But then I also said, listen, May is a bad time because students are on exams, faculty will be away. So how would you do this launch? And he said, no, don't worry, I'll be able to bring in amazing people into the India International Center. I said, so long as you're able to get 50 people, that should be good. And he has surprised all of us, and thank you so much for being present here. This actually gives a great source of encouragement for a young scholar like Arup that this matters. Work like this matters, but more importantly, academic work, intellectually engaging work, rigorous work of this kind is being celebrated in the form in which we've all come together. So once again, thank you to all of you for being present here. Now I have the greatest pleasure to invite Arup Chatterjee, Assistant Professor, Jindal Global Law School, to give an author's introduction of the book.
Thank you, sir. Encouragement does boost the confidence of a young scholar, but it also adds a lot of responsibility to the primary work that is research and writing, partly event management. But I think I feel all the more responsible to come in after 1,500 publications from the university. So being the 1,500th or 1,501th is a matter of huge responsibility. And I am a bundle of nerves, therefore, today. However, it does remind me of a very, very common situation that all of us have found ourselves in. That is of traveling in the railways, because we sit on a seat that has been left behind by definitely more than 1,500 or 15,000 or 15 million people. I'm very sure that I have sat on those seats. I have actually sat on the floors of the railways. I have sat in the lavatories of the railways while traveling. I've traveled in first-class compartments, and all those spaces have been used by many, many passengers who've come before me. I wonder if we take upon ourselves the responsibility of being a passenger, rather than being a writer or a scholar or a poet or a public speaker or a politician. Now, these are very domestic or extremely common activities which we never celebrate as socially important. And we do not ever realize how socially important it is to travel and to make temporary families, mobile families. So these are dwellings in transits, essentially, when we travel in the railways, especially when railways used to be a longer process, when traveling wasn't as fast as it is today. By the way, today is also the inaugural day of the Tejas Express, which is running from Bombay to Goa. And I believe it's a very happy and auspicious day for the Indian Railways. And I hope it is going to be none the worse for the Purveyors of Destiny. With that note, I'd like to start a small presentation into what my book is all about. The book is much larger than what I would like to show you today. These are just pictures. It's a narratology in images about the Indian Railways. But prior to that, I just would like to make a couple of apologies. Now, these are personal apologies. Nobody else except the people who've actually materially contributed to the book have been thanked in the book. Shashank Nanda, whose image became the cover photograph, has been acknowledged. My publishers, they have been thanked. But it's a very small list of people. And my family, I'm afraid, haven't found a mention there. In my ideal approach, I would rather like my name also not to appear in the forthcoming books that I hope to write, because these things eventually do not matter. The author, his personal circumstances, his name, his family contributions are things that people need not look into. I believe in the future, especially in a digital era of the post-truth. However, I must thank my wife very, very much, because she has been a silent observer and academic that she is. She's had a lot of difficulty coping with my, at times, brilliant and at times not so remarkable ideas. One has to go through a lot of strange mood swings when one is married to a moody writer. My extended family, of course, and everybody, all my well-wishers, my father and my mother are also people who haven't found a mention in that book, and I would like to briefly thank them for being a huge support to me. Moving on to my presentation, which won't take too much of your precious time. Could I just, yeah. So, there were two great actors in the history of the Indian Railways. And these were people representing the private interests of Great Britain in India in the 1840s. Now, the 1830s to 1840s was the time in Great Britain when in fact, I believe the entire continent of Europe was going through a phase of railway mania. And with the rise of the joint stock companies, there was a lot of private investment in the railways. Many people went homeless, they lost their pennies, they became bankrupt due to railway scams. And by the end of the 1840s, the railway mania was on a considerable decline because the British did not know how to recoup the money which they had spent into their own railways. Now, this is the image of a painting of the Darling and Stockton Railway, which was the first public railway in the entire world to use steam engines. Prior to this, people used to use cattle and horses to travel in the railways. And this was the time when Britain was going through a major crisis in its railway industry. I use the word industry because it was, after all, a private enterprise, especially in India. And the two great actors who introduced the railways and the proposals for the railways into India were John Chapman, who was the chief promoter of the Great Indian Peninsula Railway, and Roland MacDonald Stevenson, who was the promoter of the East India Railway Company. Now, I have been a little more partial towards Roland MacDonald Stevenson in my book, partly because of the East India Railway connection. Now, that name has a great nostalgic value for all of us, whether or not you are Bengali, because it has been splurged all over our history textbooks. The East India Company or the East India Rail Company are names which at times we have a certain loyalty towards, despite being vehemently critical of the colonial enterprise. And besides, the other reason was MacDonald is generally not as well known as John Chapman because of the GIPR, which was afforded greater celebrity because the first rail run, the passenger train run, was from Bombay to Thane in 1853. Anyhow, so these two gentlemen tend to culminate in someone who we known as Lord Dalhousie, whose minute of 1853 was as momentous as Lord Macaulay's minute of 1825. Now, the railway minute of Dalhousie simply stated that private companies from Britain will have a major shareholding in the Great Indian Railways, and the Indian Railways were basically an outsourced industry, therefore, and which is why many scholars in recent times have contributed to an understanding. I think it is still evolving that the Indian Railways did not bring us benefits or as many as we think they did. They probably gave us the English language because many people started reading more and more on the Indian Railways. They gave us an understanding of ancillary industries, and therefore when Karl Marx talks about the railways in 1853 in an article in the New York Tribune, he says that the railways might give India an opportunity to break the shackles of imperialism, to transfer power and economic agency into the hands of the working classes, because it will foster the rise of other ancillary industries. And that is where my book actually begins, because I try to interpret Marx's prophecy in a way that I hope people have actually thought about it prior to this book as well. But what I think is that the real industry of representations of cultural artifacts which came out of the railways has not really been covered by historians so far, or at least by historians who did not have great access to the Indian languages and the Indian culture. Now, there are some remarkable writers such as E.N.J. Kerr, and R.K. Bhandari, who have contributed greatly to the history of the Indian Railways, but they have contributed more on the sides of the political policies or the economic policies of the government of India, and before that the British government. None of them has really gone into an in-depth survey and study of the cultural biography of the Indian Railways. The reason why my presentation starts with this image is you see here an example of how representation of the railways spreads across many geographies. Now, this is the Darling-Stockton Railway in 1844, and immediately, I'm so sorry. Immediately later is the first train from Bombay to Thane, or as it is rumored, but actually it is the train that's crossing the Dapuri viaduct over Mula River. Now, I asked my father yesterday if he could see similarities between the two images. He said no. And I'm pretty sure that many of you will not see the similarity either. But this is what we call an aesthetic of representation. You see, the two people there, of course, the cattle is missing here, as in the previous image. But the two people there are pretty much substituted in this case. And it's a viaduct bridge again. So this aesthetic of representing the railways in a certain way, where the railways are always above you as a sublime object of gaze, of worship even, because as Niraj C. Chaudhary and other writers of the early 20th century have claimed that when they were younger, the railways actually came to substitute the gods and goddesses of Bengal and the other states wherever the railways penetrated, which is what we have come to term as the technological sublime, and therefore the railways, which were introduced by the British as a mission of civilization, of their great engineering, of their diaspora, and plenty of other, selfish economic interests, actually became a substitute for, at times, the Indian religiously minded people. This is the first train image that actually has been handed over to us. This was actually one of the first oldest image that we have, and it is drawn by cattle rather than steam engines, and the description follows on the side. These are bullocks hauled train on narrow gauge track between Dabhoi and Miagam. This is the railway construction workers, and it's an image from the 1890s, one of the very rare images. And as I mentioned, Professor Ian J. Kerr points out quite correctly that the unnumbered dead laborers, their count by the rail sleepers, was 1,700 people per railway mile. And as some scholars have recently pointed out, the cost of making the railways in the 19th century was nearly 10 times in India as that of having them made in the United States. So if 1 mile of railway tracks cost 2,000 pounds in the United States, in India it would have cost nearly 20,000 sterling pounds. And at the same time, India was undergoing a decade of severe droughts and famines. And the railways, which were promised as an industry of expediting the process of supplying food and relief materials, failed grossly. People like Florence Nightingale wrote passionate letters to the British government saying that we need the irrigation canals more than the railways. We do not need the railways. It's 10 times more the expenditure, and people are dying because of the railways. But the British government did not find that very interesting. Another aspect of the railways in representation is its architecture. This is the Victoria Terminus station, and many of you, I think, in this case, will recognize the resemblance which it has with, on the one hand, St. Pancras station, which is just before the VT was built in Bombay, and immediately later, the Flinders Street railway station in Melbourne. Now, these were both designs made on the Gothic / Indo-Saracenic design, and this is, some kind of a reflexivity in geography which happens in an architectural example. We do tend to derive aspects from other places, and other countries or monuments would like to derive aspects of architecture from ours. So these are the 3 monuments which were designed between 3 decades of each other, and that's how the representation of Indian Railways has traveled, not just within India but also outside. Now, this is the Lahore railway station, and it was very much part of the Indian Railways even 70 years ago. And people who have visited some of the railway stations of the northern belt of India or the Sialda railway station would recognize the arches here, which are very similar across stations like, if I'm not mistaken, Mughal Sarai or Gomo, which I distinctly remember has also these arches, although I haven't gotten down at the railway station. And other kinds of representation also flourished during the 19th century. Now, this one, for instance, is from a magazine called The Graphic, where a tiger has entered the railway station. This was actually a regular feature in the Himalayan railways, especially the Darjeeling Himalayan railway stations. On the other side, you have an image of the train stopping, and then there's the Hindu tea stall, because research has plenty, and this book as well has plenty of evidence of how tea, water, and food was segregated on the Indian railways. Now, meanwhile, all this was happening, and there was a latent awareness of how the railways not just join people together in communities, but also segregate them. There was one intellectual brewing in the background. He was just returning from South Africa around this time. I think in the 1890s was the time when he was really struggling to recover from a traumatic experience he had at the Pietermaritzburg railway station, and he vowed to come back very hard. He wrote a tract called Hind Swaraj, and in 1916 he took the Indian railways on a massive nationwide journey. His name is Mahatma Gandhi. He went to Champaran to protest against the opium and the indigo plantations. And that image of Gandhi coming out of the railways or standing on, against the railway engine, toothless in his dhoti, has become one of the great emblems of the Indian nationalist movement. And the railways, from being pure literary representations or imagistic representations, became a much wider political representation, because now the railways were in myths and they were in legends. They were no longer confined to the covers or the newspapers or the books. With Gandhi, the railways entered the nationalist imagination, and Gandhi changed the way people would see the railways hitherto. Henceforth, the railways were a mobile dwelling in aristocracy. Even the Indian nationalists would not like to travel second class or third class. But Gandhi changed all that. And this is one of the many, many images of Gandhiji that we have. Other very remarkable personalities who traveled the Indian railways and wrote significant passages about them were people like Rabindranath Tagore, Jawaharlal Nehru. There was also Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Also, he doesn't leave us, although he doesn't leave us with many of descriptions of the railways, but he has delivered many speeches at railway platforms. And this is, I'm afraid, something that I feel very, I don't know what's the word for it. It's something that I talk about with a great deal of difficulty, and I wish this chapter hadn't been a part of the book. But as I've observed in my study of several other books or tracts or essays, it is this chapter that people look forward to most of all. And I'm afraid, I'm glad I'm told that consciousness is changing today, but I'm afraid many people in the 80s or the 90s have tried to stereotype and sensationalize the history of the partition of the subcontinent. And images of the railways are especially splendidly, remarkably horrifying. And many scholars have gone on to write pages and pages about it. I do something very different from that. I try to not go down that path. And the chapter on partition, therefore, rather than sensationalizing the role of the railways, tries to give a more responsible role to these dumb waiters of the partition, as I call them. Moving on as fast as possible from that episode, we have the train carrying the ashes of Mahatma Gandhi here in this image. And finally, when India is independent, we have the burst of Eastman color on our TV screens and our celluloids. TV screens, I say, because I have seen these on TV screens. I haven't had the fortune of living that era when there was no television. Now, we have the Indian railways in some form of reclamation. India has truly come ahead of its trauma of partition. It has also reclaimed the Indian railways, made it truly Indian. And here we have the Queen of Hills Darjeeling, or Sharmila Tagore, or the King of Films, Rajesh Khanna, and the Darjeeling Himalayan Railways, which somehow starts getting subsumed in the background because the characters on screen are so powerful. Now, the Indian Railways here as well are playing a very, very faithful role of trying to help the characters mature and fulfill a dream on screen, which we couldn't perhaps in our lives. And in another slide, we have Kishore Kumar from Half Ticket. He's singing a song of national integration, which was a very important role of the Indian Railways, especially after that gruesome episode of 1947. We had to be integrated, and the railways gave us the imagination of how. Although we totally understand the economic critique that goes into Gandhi's Hind Swaraj, and he calls the railways the plague of this nation and colony. We have to integrate eventually, because we have to live as a nation. And the Indian Railways teaches us how to. It also teaches us how to love, like Devanand and Wahida Rahman in Solwa Saal. It teaches us how to fall in love accidentally in Baaton Baaton Mein, when two passengers come face to face almost each day, and each one awaits the entry of the other when they are sick or engaged elsewhere. And then we have that remarkable song from Burning Train, which is Pal Do Pal Ka Saath Hamara. And can anyone guess which film this slide is from? Well, that's wonderful, because I didn't think you'd be able to. So this is a very iconic scene, and most people would like to concentrate on the scene which borrows heavily from the film Stagecoach, which is the chase of the dacoits past the railway train. But this is actually the first train that brings a semblance of civilization, or the police, or the other governmental infrastructures into this unknown township called Ramgarh. And it is the promise of the trains that it'll bring some alien or, not so native protectors of this village against the army of Gabbar. So the railways here as well are playing a great civilizing and a protecting mission, as it was promised by the British. So some parts do remain, some ideologies do remain, and I hope for the better of us. And this, another iconic scene, which I haven't even, I don't even wish to ask you, because I know all of you know about this, is a remarkable watershed moment in the history of the Indian Railways and the history of Indian economics. This is the decade when we have the first neoliberal policies in India, and somehow personal relations, our relationship with our parents, our in-laws, our friends, our relationship to commodities, the act of consumption, everything goes a paradigm shift after this. And Dilwale Dulhania Le Jayenge, I'm told, Sir, Dr. Sinha would like to differ, and I'm very glad he does, because we look forward to that wisdom. But I think this does help us, this film and the decade, recuperate many of the older traditions in a neoliberal package. But there are many problems that also come with it. So the discussion on Dilwale Dulhania Le Jayenge and its depiction of the railways, I hope is something that you might want to look forward to, because it comes at the very end. But not to forget, these heroic people who, in good or bad ways, or at least in very interesting ways, wrote about the railways. The first is, of course, Rudyard Kipling. And in the wake of Kipling comes somebody called Flora Annie Steele, who we don't much read in India. There's Mark Twain, who not many people know, wrote a huge book on his journey in India called Following the Equator. And he was actually writing that to come out of Potpourri, because he had gone bankrupt. And he wrote that book for submission to an award category. He did not win that award, but managed to win a lot of money out of his book. So he lived on to give us better books, partly thanks to the Indian Railways, I guess. And then there is R.K. Narayan, who has given us the amazing township of Malgudi, where there is a railway station, and there is one station master. And because of the railways, we hear about this town. which nobody else seems to have known before R.K. Narayan. There is Ruskin Bond, and he has recently gone on to say that as long as he had railways or will have the railways, he would never have run short of stories. So one person who we cannot forget his long-standing association with the Indian Railways. And there is someone again who we don't recognize very much. He's a poet, Arun Kolatkar, and his collection called Jejuri talks about the railways in many quaint and nostalgic poems. And there are numerous other authors who are part of this book, who all have written about the Indian Railways and given us a huge family of joys, a great history to reflect upon, a wonderful text to study, and a remarkable society to gaze at, to be amazed by, at times to criticize, at times to use for our national integration, and at times just to help people gather to one single platform and wish the Indian Railways all the success in its future project, which has just started today in the form of Tejas Express. I hope Tejas Express becomes one of the remarkable purveyors of destiny, and I also hope it blesses this work in what it is going to become. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Arup, for that. We started the program like 4 minutes before 7, and I was so excited that we are starting something before schedule. And Arup was supposed to speak for like 10 minutes. He took like a good academic, like 25 minutes. So our schedule is now in a different situation, but it was a very welcome one. Thank you so much for those reflections. So now we invite our distinguished chief guest and guest of honor, Mr. Shakti Siddharth, to formally release the book.
Unfortunately, the Honorable Union Minister for Railways, Mr. Suresh Prabhakar Prabhu, could not make it today, for it's an important day in the history of the Indian Railways, as it has been mentioned earlier in the program. The launch of the Bombay-Goa Tejas Express is taking place today, as you speak, and we are still awaiting his arrival. He did, however, send us a few words in case he happened to be late or absent.
I'm very happy that The Purveyors of Destiny is a book written by my good friend Arup Chatterjee is being launched now. I wanted to be there personally to partake in this program and to enjoy the benefit of the company that all of you are having. Unfortunately, I am traveling. But I am a great lover of books. I keep reading all the time. And I already started reading this, though not completed fully. And I can already see the great talent in the author's writing. I am sure this book is the beginning of a long journey in which he will continue to enthrall us in his writing in the years to come. I look forward to more such books coming in. I already met the author, and I am very impressed with the type of commitment that he has shown. I'm also thankful to the Vice Chancellor for encouraging such good activities. I think OP Jindal University is full of talent and people which can ensure that over a period of time we continue to benefit from this. So congratulations to the author and the best wishes for the book.
Now I invite Mr. Shakti Siddharth to make his presentation.
Thank you, Raj. My Congratulations to Arup. When Raj asked me to come for the function, I had read the book review already. And the book review, thank you. And the book review was so good that I didn't even take a second to say yes to it. Now, the book is definitely not a disappointment, but yes, as Arup says, I would not agree with everything that he says, which is a good thing, which means that it has provoked me into thinking about, how do you write a cultural biography of the railways? I didn't even know what it meant, cultural biography. It's not a narrative, it's not a straight narrative. That could be just a normal biography. But the way railways, what did the railways represent at different times? And how the railways have been represented in different mediums. And the book varies from being very fast-paced, when it describes Satyajit Ray's Sonar Killa. That's really fast-paced. You actually feel the pulse moving. At times it becomes absolutely solidly academic, when Foucault comes in and others comes in, right? And in the last chapter, of course, where he really gets into deconstructing. I'm not sure whether the makers of Dilwale Dulhania Le Jayenge really knew that when they were doing this, somebody would later say, no, you were doing this because of this reason. So that's the advantage of being an academic, which is a good thing. Yes, you mentioned Kipling. Even before Kipling, he mentioned something very interesting, which as a student of history I did not know, which is that in the time of the 1857 struggle, liberation, First War of Independence, mutiny, call it what you may, disturbances, on behalf of the Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar, a proclamation was issued, the Azam Ghani Proclamation, which among other things said that we look after Indian businessmen and the state shall make provision for transport of goods by steam ships, important, and steam carriages. Now, railways had not come to Delhi then, and yet they were talking about railways as an economic thing and what the state should be doing. To me, that is absolutely revolutionary. Now, obviously, Kipling, of course, the railways have represented for us the state. It represented imperial penetration of India. How the railways, the first effective railway line, Thane is fine, was the Raniganj Calcutta line. Why? The coal mines. And in fact, somebody commented that had they spent some more money and made the line to Delhi by 1857, the Brits would have saved a lot of money fighting and recovering. So they were able to shift the army. And then they said, now we have to make sure these lines are there because this is our only way to. And as a result, the railways, though funded entirely by Indians. Now, yes, the companies were British, they were owned by Britishers who were investing in it, but it guaranteed returns. So in effect, India underwrote the entire railways expansion. But the railways are so militaristic in nature that even if you look at, and I used to always wonder, and I found out the reality only after reading your book, why do railway stations and especially bridges resemble fortifications? They do. Big stations, the Old Delhi station, the bridges, what fictional bridge that Rudyard Kipling calls the Kashi Bridge, maybe the Dufferin Bridge at Allahabad, now of course, Malviya Bridge. It has towers, it has provisions for musketry. Stations, Charbagh station in Lucknow was built with an armory and with provision that the entire European population of Lucknow could stay to be protected in case disturbances rose again. Extremely militarist, the railway project, and extremely economic from the British point of view. So it didn't help in time of famines in transporting grain into the grain deficit areas, but it did help in taking grain out of deficit areas. So which is why, whether it was Mahatma Gandhi, whether it was Digby, whether it was Florence Nightingale, they all said invest in irrigation instead. But there's no money in irrigation, there was money in railways. And I frankly did not know Gandhi had written a book called Third Class in India. I had read of all of Gandhi's books. This book definitely escaped me. But yes, coming back to Kipling, the first literally paperbacks, and my wife was from Allahabad, so the owners of Wheeler were the next door neighbors in Tagore town. Originally was a Frenchman, of course, Mr. Jean-Francois Moreau. How Kipling really used the railways to develop this, what we now call airport paperback. You pick up a book at the airport, by the next day you're done with the book, you're done with the book, literally, you know. And he was paid for his writing substantial sums of money. For the initial was 200 pounds, those days was a hell of a lot of money. And subsequently 4 pounds for every book sold, so every few books sold, 1,000 books sold. Remarkable. Routledge. We all think of Routledge as a very, very serious academic publishers, right? The most expensive books in India, definitely. And very good books, to be fair. Routledge was what? Ultimately, they were booksellers in England or railway stations for the cheap paperbacks, cheap trash novels, as they call it, you know. Which is why when these Wheeler opened up in India, the British, the missionaries, the rector of St. Xavier's College was very, very upset that all this lax French morality will seep into the natives who are in any case spoiled and lazy and indolent. So, you know, it's really the kind of things, how the railways in freedom struggle changes nature, how post-independence, and he used a lovely word somewhere, train symbolizing freedom and escape from feudal oppression, right? I didn't like your view with words, though again when you say that in Kipling uses terrain, which is the way North Indians speak Hindi, English, Indian English, to terrain, which is why the railways were penetrating. I think again that you're giving Kipling, I think, more this thing than it due to Kipling, right? But as I said, if you look, women's safety was an issue in the Indian railways in the 1870s. Women frequently complained of being molested, raped, all kinds of things. They had to start portioning off a portion of the compartment of women's only bogies to do that. So something which has really stayed with us, unfortunately, for a very, very long time. But trains as nameless, casteless, vagrant wanderer. I mean, if you, as I said, when you look at it, I really understand why the railways have so penetrated Indian life that today, for most of us, it's not at all British in origin. It is very much India. The same chaos we see on the bazaars of Chandni Chowk, we see on the railway stations. So despite the best efforts to clean stations, you'll have very clean stations, but the photographs will show 10,000 people, so you can't even see the cleanliness. And of course, somebody did refer to it that the Indians have carried the village to the platform. Something Arup may not agree with, but to some extent you can imagine it, you know. You can really see how the trains send. And the books you have, I mean, the sheer listing and details of the books where railways feature in minor, majorly, or the movies. I don't even heard of many of these. Of course, that lady you mentioned, Anne Steele, very unusual writer, no? Very unusual writer. But yes, when freedom movement came and Gandhi used the railway platform as his place to address the public and to collect chanda. Gandhi said, when you come to the platform to hear me speak, please bring 1 paisa along, I have to collect money. And he collected, one place he collected 2,000 rupees, which in the 20s, 21 was a large sum of money. And how ticketless traveling and chain pulling became a badge of honor. This is how I'm going to disrupt the Angrez Raj. Our own little, and there's very good sociological work in Malaysia, how the plantation labor, when they become lazy or indolent, is actually, it's not that they are, it is their way of expressing their frustration and their rebellions. So I think here also it comes across. Finally, Gandhi had to tell people, no, for heaven's sake, don't stop trains, don't travel ticketless, it's a bad thing for us, we are not uncivilized people. But yes, the terrible partition which you talk about, and of course, the full version of how people reacted to the, though not, I wouldn't agree again with Nirad C. Chaudhary. Kishore Ganji in 1916 was two generations after the trains had come there. If Nirad C. Chaudhary was still worshipping trains in 1916, possibly because he later became an Anglophile. Why would you worship train in 1960? I mean, 1870, 1880s, I can imagine it. But so late in life. But yes, trains meant different people. Mark Twain's lovely description of Banaras crossing the river, or all over India, how women on the banks of the river were trying to break stones with the clothes. And of course, I was very pleasantly surprised to learn, not from the book, but from the reading of Mark Twain years ago, that he actually went to this little town in Bihar called Muzaffarpur to speak. If you go to Muzaffarpur today to speak, I'd be surprised. So I'm happy National Archives has organized a very good seminar in Muzaffarpur. He did. One movie you have missed, Bhuvaneshwam. Bhuvaneshwam opens with that lovely Utpal Dutt's character. He's a senior railway officer. Of course, Barpul's book is set in North Bihar. This gets to Saurashtra. But there also the rail has a very important symbolic, But I guess once you have listed 500 books and movies and seen them and read them, I think the sheer effort of it is very, very staggering. So all I can say at this is not a book which is easy to talk about, because as I said, it's not linear. But it does really express how at different times the railways as representation and the way railways are represented have changed so dramatically that nobody in 1850s could imagine that in the year of war, in 2000, now I can't even say year of the Lord, it's not politically correct anymore, in 2017 common era, as I said, railways is so much part of our Indian life. And nobody in the world uses the trains more than we do. Nobody in the world, not even the Chinese. Chinese use the trains far more for goods, but as daily users of trains, we are far, far, far ahead. We were one railways in 47. Today, Bangladesh and Pakistan railways are defunct, completely derelict. Ours have become much, much stronger. And I think our leaders did realize that though a railway construct to begin with, the railways could be a very important role in binding the country together, especially more than politically, economically binding together. With that, let me wish Arup all the very, very best for this lovely book. I look forward to a new book which is on the history of India, which for a student of English is very interesting. We'll see more of Edward Said and Foucault maybe. And Raj, I must congratulate you for having such excellent faculty who have produced not only books in numbers, but books in qualities also. Once again, thank you.
Thank you for those lovely words, sir. Now I would like to invite Dr. Y.S.R. Murthy, Registrar at the O.P. Jindal Global University, for the vote of thanks, so we may commence with the panel discussion after.
Indian Railways is a great institution. It's a great unifier and connector, bridging distances between states, families, and peoples. There's not one story here, there are many stories. And for attempting such a book, my colleague from Jindal Global Law School, Dr. Arup, deserves all our praise. And we look forward to more books in the years to come. I want to thank the Honorable Railway Minister for his support and encouragement. I want to thank our guest of honor, Mr. Shakti Sinha, a distinguished civil servant and also director of the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, for gracing the occasion and presiding over this function and for giving his reflections on the book. I want to thank the family members, father, mother, and the wife of Dr. Arup for participating in this function. I also want to thank the experts who are participating in the panel discussion that's going to follow. I want to thank our Vice Chancellor for acknowledging and celebrating the achievements of our faculty members by organizing such book launches. Without his constant encouragement and support, the 1,500 odd publications would not have come about. I also want to thank our events team and communications team, Mr. Devdeep, Mr. Vikas Chandok, for their role in organizing this function. I can see my old colleague, Mr. M.Y. Siddiqui, who has been associated with railways for many years, and I'm sure in this audience there are many others who have been closely associated with the railways. I want to thank all the distinguished participants of today's function, and I also want to thank the print and electronic media for covering this function. Thank you.
All right, we will not have a break now. We will immediately begin the panel discussion. So I invite our distinguished panelist, Ms. Himanjali Sankar, publisher, editor of Bloomsbury, and author Talking of Muskan, Professor Dr. Amit Ranjan, Assistant Professor Zakir Hussain, Delhi College, Delhi University, Mr. Manu Pillai, author, The Ivory Throne, Chronicles of the House of Travancore, and of course Arup himself to join in this panel.
Raj, I request you to present a memento to our guest of honor.